You ever look at a situation that just seems like a complete and total disaster and you're just left thinking, what on earth is happening here? Well, that's exactly the feeling you get when you look at the Apostle Paul's big trip to Jerusalem in Acts chapter 21. I mean, this is God's chosen ambassador, right? Probably the most effective missionary the world has ever seen. And his journey ends how? In chains. On the surface, it looks like a massive, massive failure. But what if it wasn't? Okay, let's dive right into this incredible paradox.
So this is the big question, really. It's what this whole story hinges on. It kind of cuts right to the heart of faith, doesn't it? Why would an all-powerful God, who wants his message to get out there, allow his number one guy to be arrested and silenced? It just feels so counterintuitive. But, as we're about to see, there's a much, much deeper strategy at play. And boom, here it is. This is the key that unlocks the whole mystery, and it comes from Paul himself, writing from prison. The core idea here, the big theological takeaway, is this: you can chain the messenger, but you can't chain the message. This one thought completely reframes Paul's arrest. It's not a setback, it's actually a strategic deployment.
All right, so to really get how Paul ended up in chains, we have to retrace his steps. See, his journey to Jerusalem wasn't some blind stumble into a trap. Far from it. In fact, you could say it was a path that God lit up with these flashing warning signs every single step of the way.
Okay, so here we see Paul traveling from what we'd call modern-day Turkey, heading down the coast towards Jerusalem. Now, there are two stops on this trip that are absolutely crucial to our story. First, the port city of Tyre, and then a little further south to Caesarea, which was basically the Roman capital of the whole province. And at each of these stops, the prophetic warnings just get louder and way more intense.
So the way Paul interprets these warnings is just fascinating. In Tyre, you have fellow believers, and Luke says they're speaking through the Spirit, telling him, don't go. Then it gets even more dramatic in Caesarea. A prophet named Agabus shows up, grabs Paul's belt, and literally ties his own hands and feet with it. He says this is exactly what's going to happen to the guy who owns this belt. But here's the twist. Paul doesn't see these as stop signs from God. Nope, he sees them as get-ready signs. This wasn't God telling him not to go. It was God preparing him for what was coming.
And this was his incredible response. I mean, think about it. He's facing the certainty of being arrested. All his friends are begging him not to go, and Paul doesn't even flinch. He's not just being stubborn here. He is resolved. He gets his mission, and he is willing to see it through no matter what it costs him personally.
This comparison just brilliantly shows how deep Paul's decision goes. The source material points out this powerful parallel between what Paul does here and Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's that same moment of surrendering your own personal safety for a higher, divine purpose. And when his friends see his resolve, they finally stop arguing. And what do they say? The Lord's will be done. It's an incredible echo of Jesus' own prayer.
So Paul makes it to Jerusalem, and you'd think the threat would be from the Romans or some other outsiders, right? But nope, not at first. The most immediate danger is actually coming from inside the church, and it's all being fueled by some really dangerous rumors and, well, misinformation. Okay, here's the conflict. In Jerusalem, there were thousands of Jewish Christians who were super zealous about the law of Moses, and they'd heard this false report that Paul was going around telling other Jews to basically abandon their entire heritage. But the reality was way more nuanced. Paul's whole point was that these Jewish customs were not a requirement for salvation, especially for Gentiles, not that they were somehow bad things to do. Big difference.
So to try and shut down this rumor, James and the other church elders cook up a plan. It's a very public, very visible act of cultural solidarity. They ask Paul to join these four guys who are finishing up a Jewish vow, to go through all the purification rites with them, and to even pay for their expenses. The goal was totally visual, to show everybody, hey look, Paul has not rejected his Jewish roots.
And Paul agrees. He does it. Now, why? Because this whole ritual didn't compromise the gospel one bit. So the key thing to see here is Paul's incredible wisdom. He's totally willing to be culturally flexible if it means keeping the church unified. He knows how to separate what's a cultural tradition from what is absolutely essential to the faith.
But even with this really careful plan for peace, the whole situation is just a powder keg waiting to go off. And all it's going to take is one little spark, one false assumption for the whole thing to just explode, and for all those prophecies about Paul's arrest to come true in the most violent way you can imagine.
Now, to get what happens next, you have to understand the temple layout. See, there's this big outer area.
the court of Gentiles, where pretty much anyone could go. But the inner courts, those were sacred, reserved for Jews only. And to bring a non-Jew into that sacred space was seen as the highest form of defilement. It was an offense punishable by death.
And this is the charge they throw at Paul. Some guys from the province of Asia had seen Paul walking around the city with a man named Trophimus, who was a Gentile. So when they later see Paul in the temple, they just assume he brought Trophimus into the inner courts with him. They didn't see it happen, they just jumped to a conclusion, and that was all it took to start a full-blown riot.
And from there, things just escalated with unbelievable speed. The mob grabs Paul, they drag him out of the inner courts, and they just start beating him, fully intending to kill him. And then comes the ultimate irony. The Roman army, the occupying force, has to rush in to save Paul's life from his own people. The commander arrests him, binds him in 2 chains, and in that moment, he fulfills the prophecy of Agabus right down to the last detail.
The scene is just pure chaos. As the soldiers are literally carrying Paul away to keep him safe, the crowd is just screaming for his death. This isn't a theological debate anymore, you know? It's a lynch mob. Every single warning Paul received on his journey has now come true.
So there he is. Paul is in chains. A mob wants him dead. It looks like a complete and total defeat. But now we can finally circle back to that question we started with and see the real answer. This wasn't the end of the mission. No way. It was the beginning of its most important phase yet.
This is the big shift in perspective we have to make. The chains weren't a barrier, they were a key. Yeah, they locked him out of the temple, but they were about to unlock doors to places the gospel had never, ever been heard before.
Just think about it for a second. As a prisoner of the Roman Empire, Paul is now inside the legal system. This gives him a state-sanctioned platform to give his testimony, to tell his story, and to proclaim the gospel to Roman governors, military commanders, and eventually all the way to Caesar's household in Rome. I mean, these are audiences he never could have dreamed of reaching otherwise.
So at the end of the day, the ultimate takeaway is this. God used the very systems designed to control and suppress people, both the Jewish religious authorities and the Roman legal machine, and turned them into a stage. Paul's chains literally secured him the audiences God wanted him to reach, so he could proclaim the message of a Savior for all people, Jew and Gentile alike. And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. You know, if God can take something like an arrest, a brutal imprisonment, and flip it into one of the greatest strategic moves for the gospel, well, that really makes you think, doesn't it? It forces us to look at our own lives and ask a really tough question. Where's there a chain in my life right now? A setback, a limitation, some kind of trial? Is it possible that that very thing could be a hidden opportunity for God's unchained message to break through in a way I never saw coming?